Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm RHONDA HOLBERTON. I'm a professor in digital media art at San Jose State University in the Department of Art and Art History. Tonight, we will be discussing the future of alternative art exhibitions. I know I'm not alone in kind of reconceiving of what artistic practice means during a pandemic, and then as we emerge from our kind of socially distant selves, what are we merging into? What kind of world do we want to build and kind of imagine using the arts and nonprofit spaces to do that? This event was made possible by an Artistic Excellence Programming grant from the College of Humanities and the Arts at San Jose State University, and is produced in partnership with the Wish You Were Here Correspondence exhibition put on by the Thompson Gallery at San Jose State University. I'd like to thank everyone for being here. And before we move on, I want to make a land acknowledgement. While we are gathered virtually, San Jose State, our host, is located on the ethno-historic tribal territory of the Tamian Ohlone, who are the direct ancestors of the lineages enrolled in the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, and who were missionized into Mission Santa Clara, San Jose, and Dolores. The lands on which San Jose State University is established was and continues to be of significance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. We also recognize that the ancestors of the Muwekma Ohlone constructed and maintained 3 Bay Area missions. Our campus extends to the surrounding areas that held a tupantak, a traditional roundhouse, which were once located in the historic Lope Ñijos land grant Ranchero Pozolme y Pozitas de las Animas, Little Wells of Souls, and also Marcelo, Pio, and Cristobal's land grant, Ranchero Ulistac, which were places of celebration and religious ceremonies, as well as nearby ancestral heritage shell mounds that served as the tribe's traditional cemetery sites and territorial monuments. Thank you for acknowledging the land on which the university sits with me. And now I'd like to introduce briefly our guests tonight. And we have with us DENA Beard, Executive Director of the Lab in San Francisco, Marcella Faustini and Charlie LEESE, co-directors of CLOACA projects, also in San Francisco, CECI MOSS, curator, author, educator, PhD, and founding director of the nonprofit's nonprofit GAS, Dorothy SANTOS, Executive Director of the Processing Foundation, and also Wade Wallerstein, co-director of Transfer Gallery and founder of Silicon Valet. Thank you all for joining me tonight. Today we're going to start out with the introduction of everyone's practice, about 5 minutes, and then we'll open up for general Q&A. And I think we'll just go through in order, unless one of our panelists would like to start. I would just go in the same order of the invitation. We'll start with DENA, Marcella, and then Charlie, then CeCi, Dorothy, and then Wade. Does that sound all right? Wonderful. Okay, take it away, DENA.
Thank you so much for having us all, RHONDA. I love all these people. It's so great to be here. So my name is DENA Beard. I'm the director of the Lab, which is an alternative art space in San Francisco.
Do you want to talk a little bit about like what the Lab does and what your current projects are, and give a little bit more context for the Lab?
Sure. Like the 3 to 5 sentence introduction. So. Yeah. The Lab is basically, it was a space founded by art students in 1984, an auspicious year. And it's been around in the Mission District of San Francisco for about 20 years. And we basically kind of collectively have worked together as a community over the past 6 years to give unrestricted stipends to artists of $25,000 to $100,000 each, healthcare, a space to work and do projects, as well as being an active, basically, event venue and performing arts space. So we do exhibitions from time to time, but we primarily focus on what we're good at, which is sound artworks and a lot of different kind of performance art projects. So we normally, under pre-pandemic times, did about 4 to 6 projects per month. But now we've been doing online forums about 2 to 3 times a month, which you can find on our website, thelab.org.
Awesome.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marcella. Faustini. I run CLOACA projects with Charlie. Prior to that, I had a practice as an artist that kind of went into more of a curatorial way. And I ran a couple of spaces, did a lot of independent projects. We've been doing CLOACA for the past 3 years now. I met Charlie through organizing his, through a friend, and then I organized his first solo show. And he approached me about running the space, and we have many shared interests, so it has worked out really great. Last year during the pandemic, we launched our first publication project with Nikita Gale, and right now we're in a bit of a hiatus, looking like we're coming back with a project for fall.
Awesome. And then Charlie, Marcella just gave us a great intro. Do you want to kind of talk about your involvement?
Yeah, sorry, I got knocked off there, so I don't know exactly what she said, but I'm know Marcella from being a working artist, and she was one of the first people that started coming to my studio, and we kind of built a friendship and relationship from there. And when I was looking to do some sort of exhibition space, I wanted Marcella to join, and I wasn't going to do it without her. So that's kind of how we got together on it. And
you have, in addition, so CLOACA, for those of you that don't know, it's in kind of South San Francisco. It's a walkthrough through Charlie. Also on site has a cooperative fabrication and kind of shop that you literally walk through, kind of like a wood shop and a metal shop. And then in the back, there's a courtyard and then a freestanding building with a what looks like a tiny miniature kind of like blue chip, like, you know, fluorescently lit drywalled space. Charlie, can you talk just like in a few seconds or a few sentences, about the desire to open up an exhibition space? And I mean, as a practicing artist, that's not something that everyone does. And where did that come from? And maybe like, how did that shift your own practice?
Yeah. That's a really good question. Well, for one, we kind of took a page like what you were just describing out of like the LA book of utilizing, you know, outdoor spaces and kind of whatever space we have, and being in California. I guess also to think about like the pandemic and everything. I realize now, after all of that part of it was wanting this community and things. And we always kind of focused around having a big gathering space where people can actually meet and converse. And I think that's really, really missed that. And, you know, going into looking at art on the computer just doesn't do the same thing as engaging with it and engaging with the people there. So we always wanted it to have that kind of atmosphere where the people that would come there were welcome to hang out and you know, stay for hopefully a long while, and not only look at the work but then talk to people as well. Yeah. And it's definitely shifted my own way. You know, I think like myself and a lot of other artists, I think the reason why you make work is because you maybe don't see exactly stuff out there that you want to see. So you're always trying to engage in it that way, which can also make you kind of be overly critical towards other stuff. Because I used to always kind of judge it against what I was doing, but being part of a space and being an artist has made me a lot more open to various ways of working, and appreciative of a lot of different other kind of nuances that I didn't expect that.
Awesome. I think, you know, like I have a lot more, but I'm going to put that on hold until we can open up for everyone. So next will be CeCi. Do you mind coming up to the stage here?
Hi. So my name's CeCi, and I'm a curator, writer, and educator, and I founded a place called a artist-run space called Gas. So Gas is located in a truck gallery that parks around Los Angeles and online. and it's a mobile, autonomous, experimental, and network platform for contemporary art. So it was launched in 2017, and normally GAS partners with museums and artist-run spaces and galleries and libraries to park and present the mobile truck at pop-up events. So we've worked with like Night Gallery, Tin Flats, Naval, Barbecue LA, Now Space, Cal Arts, the Getty. We also, the space, we tend to work with a number emerging visual artists, who the majority of whom are in Los Angeles. And then in terms of what we've done since COVID, all of the programs at GAS are online, and all of the previous exhibitions included online artwork, so that shift wasn't that hard. And then one focus that has emerged during this period is the subject of mutual aid, care, social justice, and rebuilding, and that's really framed a lot of the projects. And every single program organized since March 2020 has been devoted to that. So the most recent project was initiated by Camille Hanur, who's a Los Angeles artist, called Bless Our Breath. And it's a deck of playing cards that facilitate conversation, reflection, and creative process around breath as both a theme and a practice. And the card set honors the symbolic and practical implications of breath within this moment of, Black Lives Matter, the COVID-19 pandemic, and as well as like climate change resulting in the mass wildfires. And the sales of the deck supported 2 mutual aid programs, Hip Hop Smoothie Shop and East Lake United for Justice's free meal program in Oakland. And then we did some public programs with the deck, and you can download it from the GAS website. And in terms of what I'm thinking about sort of for the future, I'm in a very much a dreaming phase for the future of GAS. And so I've been asking questions like, how can GAS collaborate with other Los Angeles artist-run organizations that were negatively impacted by the pandemic and the recession? And so I really want to think about how GAS can rebuild with others, since so much of what the space has done prior to this moment was collaborating with other arts organizations, and something that the space has done really well. And then I've also been thinking a lot about collective or cooperative structures, and thinking about what that might look like for GAS. And then the other sort of 2 subjects I'd love to talk about that I've been thinking about, and I look forward to speaking with the group, is how, the spaces that we create space for healing and mourning in this moment, and then how we're thinking about innovative new forms of arts organizing, especially coming from, sort of grassroots political organizing. And that's sort of the things I've been sitting with. Awesome. And I'm happy to be here amongst all my Bay Area friends, and giving hugs all around, virtual hugs.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. This kind of ended up being a Bay Area grouping by and large, because we were expecting to be back in physical space with you all. And now you are all kind of scattered throughout, I guess, the state. But I like that too, like thinking globally with a regional group of people. Something that we haven't really experienced very much in the pandemic is that kind of intense locality. And I think, Charlie just spoke about that, and CeCi just spoke about that. I mean, intense locality in that I've been a body in front of a screen for a year and a half or whatever, but not necessarily regionally. I haven't been a collective, like part of a regional collective. And so that'll be an interesting conversation to maybe address. Awesome. Thank you, CeCi. And
thank you.
Dorothy, do you mind coming up?
Hi, everyone. I'm Dorothy Santos. I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to provide really quickly a brief visual description. I'm sitting against a kind of orange pattern chair. It's mint green walls. That was not of my choosing. My cat is to my left side. I'm Filipino American, brown skin, black top, and I have clear glasses. I am the executive director for Processing Foundation. I'm also currently a PhD student in film and digital media at UC Santa Cruz. And I guess I could talk more about the Processing Foundation and what we're doing currently. We're actually in the midst of reviewing applications for our fellowship program, which is an annual program that's been happening for, my goodness, almost 7 years. I think it's the 6th year. And it's a time where, artists from the Processing P5, basically all of the open source software projects underneath the umbrella of Processing Foundation, get a chance to work out, project ideas, works in progress, or maybe things that they've been working on that could really use a push with the help of a mentor. That's usually from within the processing community. Usually the team actually serves as we serve as mentors, but we also invite previous fellows to serve as mentors as well. And that's one of the ways that we also just get conversation going between the different types of, roles that people play: artist, writer, curator, educator, cultural producer, etc. I'm also a member of the Art and Curatorial Collective Refresh. Heather Dewey Hagborg and I co-curated a show, an exhibition, Refiguring the Future in 2019. And I've been thinking a lot about that show as, we've all kind of transitioned to the digital space and different ways of seeing and experiencing artworks. And I'm actually excited to be in conversation with you all. Very similar sentiments. I deeply admire everyone that's on this panel tonight. So I'm just excited to kind of dig into these issues of what does it mean to issues and themes that I'm interested in are that of translation, a type of ecosystem that we're trying to build here and abroad, because we have kind of access to being able to connect with so many people at this moment, unfortunately due to, the pandemic, but also what's the tension there too. I'm actually interested in the friction of all of that. So that's kind of where I'm at. And also just excited about the kind of conversation and the questions that we receive and kind of can think through together.
Thank you, Dorothy. And our final spotlight before we break out into group conversation is going to be Wade Wallerstein. So Wade, if you don't mind.
Hey guys.
Oh.
So my apologies if I drop out. I seem to be having like the worst Wi-Fi day, like on record ever. So my apologies if I come through a little on Valet, as RHONDA so kindly noted. I am really interested in the ways that we can use the internet and use our devices in order to display art in the home in personal spaces. And I think that those are really intimate and unique ways that we can connect with viewers and create experiences outside of galleries and outside of the kind of frame of the institution. And recently I curated a show for transfer called Pieces of Me, which was a response to the mounting hype of NFTs and cryptocurrency. And so right now in this particular moment, a lot of my curatorial practice is really focused on creating a foundation in that space as exhibitions are starting to shift to become more like marketplaces rather than shows of work. I think that there's a very different position on a curatorial level that the work will come from in either of those scenarios. And I'm seeing things starting to slide more towards the scale or towards the end of being a marketplace more than an exhibition space. So I'm trying to think through ways that we can kind of tap into the affordances of cryptocurrency, decentralized technologies, and the future of Web3, while at the same time building a foundation that continues to support artists, that allows us to redistribute wealth, that allows us to incorporate archival preservation, all of these things that are so important to the longevity of artists' livelihoods. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. What I'm
Well, I am so thrilled that we at least got that through that intro. Wade, if you can hear, you're breaking up a little bit, but I think one of the things that I'm really interested in is that tension. All right, so I'm going to bring back one of the tensions that I'll be interested in kind of parsing out over the our conversation is this question of art exhibition as community, as collaborative effort, and then also in its kind of in all of your practices, you're kind of pushing up against art as commodity as well, art as retail space. And I'm just going to spotlight us all. So as we start kind of pushing back into, more open social fabric, like what do we want these alternative exhibitions to look like? And do we, in CECI's model, CECI is making these interesting, unique kind of art objects, right? But that circulate through capital acquisition, but also are doing different things, right? The end point of the capital isn't necessarily in the gallerist's hands, but what does that mean for a professional gallerist, right? And should that be something that we aspire to? So there's like tensions right now that we're dealing with, but then the point of this is maybe because those tensions seem a little bit maybe insurmountable, that we might be able to look maybe further afield, you know, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years. And I think that something about that kind of speculative imagining might dislodge some of the kind of stickiness that we feel around our current moment. I'm going to see if I can find Wade back in here. There we are. Let's see if we can get you back in here. All right, so we've kind of laid the groundwork for what you're all up to right now. One of the things that I think I'd like to do next is you're all engaged in various ways with models that have kind of broken the mold, or like not the typical kind of art exhibition models. And, you know, from a food truck to a shed, to an Instagram account maybe, or, you know, online kind of exhibition space, to this like cooperatively run kind of like Marxist facing artist productive laboratory, to kind of a production support that relies on writing code as its kind of foundation, right? So these are not necessarily what you think of when we talk about galleries. And so I might ask you all to kind of find a moment for you that was like a game changer, either an exhibition or an artwork. Like, what was it? How did you kind of move? And many of you have moved through more traditional kind of art exhibition spaces. So like, what was it that like kind of opened up that door for you all to pivot towards these alternative modalities of art production and support? Should I call on someone?
I can say something first. I mean, I hope I have better service now. I'm trying from a mobile device, so apologies, everyone. You know, for me, I think that like, I don't have the necessarily like typical story of I moved into this different space because I was excluded from somewhere else, or I was unable to access an institution or funding or whatever it was. I fell into curating on the internet because I thought it was the most rich area, the most interesting area for exploration that, you know, I had available to me at the time. Like, I think that in this day and age, in kind of the current state of artistic production that we're in, the places that are interesting for experimentation and valuable for us to explore are uncharted. And I think that in a lot of ways, like especially in thinking about CECI's work and the different places that she's curated and how she's done so, I think that there is something exciting about the unknown or the different or the non. I think that all of us are so sick of traditional models and systems and protocols that we look to different and alternative modes in order to find places to thrive. And I don't know if CeCi or Dorothy, if you would say that that's accurate, but at least that was my experience. And I felt that like leaving the white cube and going into the internet space or using Instagram as an exhibition environment, that was interesting to me because that's where people were and that's where the action was happening. And it didn't seem like the action was happening like in a 4-square white wall room. And, you know, it's kind of like, you know, along the motto of, you know, staying with the trouble and following it, you know, where it goes.
I love that idea, and like using this kind of like Donna Haraway is like, you know, maybe a way like making kin with like unlike things or unsurprising things, right? That could be like a model to move forward. So it's, you know, like on the one hand, it's like, well, this is the most interesting work, right? Like the interesting work is happening in these places, like maybe in the, not in the kind of commercial pipeline or the kind of big, you know, brick and mortar, big box gallery. Are there other kind of moments in your practices that kind of prepared you for this shift?
I was thinking, I actually have something to share. Can I share when you sent this prompt to us?
Yeah.
So this is my my Gilman Street membership card from 1994. And because I think your question was like, what was transformative for you? And so I was like 13 years old when someone gave this to me and I signed it. And yeah, and I love, so Gilman is this like all ages club in Berkeley, and they're collectively run, and that is just how it is. But one thing I think about, and every time any person who goes to one of their shows, they have to buy a membership card, but it's not like a museum membership. It's basically saying that you are part of this space and you make this space. And so it's a way of curating and organizing and bringing people together that isn't about sort of elevating one voice amongst others, but you just, by the nature of walking through the doors, you help create what that space is. And like on the card, it says 94 Gilman Street is based on the fact that bands, audience, and staff are all equally important to the success of a show. And this card is a warrant to the role of the audience. This is your club. So I just think that, like, as a young person, you know, being in those kinds of spaces, I can maybe turn this off now. I don't know if I did that right. Okay. It was really important for me to be like, have that be the model. So, you know, some people come into curating and they like went to some fancy, like Ivy League art history program or something like that. And that wasn't my path or my journey. And so I got into art through music and through alternative spaces. And so I think that the way I think about, you know, making work with others or creating space with others, it is always in the round. And that was a concept that, you know, I luckily I was exposed to at a very early age, and it's something I've sort of brought through with me. And I've had just the immense, you know, luck of working with a lot of arts organizations that also have that same kind of sensibility. And so I've learned, you know, over the years through that as well. And also as someone who kind of grew up with the internet too, I think there's some truth to that too, in terms of thinking about like, what is presentation, what is conversation, and what does that look like in the round?
Mm-hmm. I love that like upon entry, you're entering a social contract, right? And thinking about like, what are the ways that we want to engage in a like a social and collaborative space together. Yeah, and that kind of pushes up against these ideas about like dislocated community or kind of networked community across kind of digital spaces, and the ways that we can create community both regionally but also globally, and by what rules do we want to engage across those networks.
I mean, I can share too. Oh, go Charlie.
Go first, Dorothy. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, just to kind of, you know, riff off of what Wade and CeCi are talking about, I think what's really unique about Processing Foundation is we've never had a brick and mortar. So we have always operated across the members who are based in the Bay Area, New York, Los Angeles, and Berlin. And, you know, working with artists from, you know, essentially all over, but especially with the programming that we have, like the fellowship program, over half of the applicants are international applicants. So artists using the different software, you know, or open source software projects, you know, or open source software for the arts, or OSTA for short, projects. That's kind of at the kind of nucleus of what they're doing is, I want to make, you know, I want to make this piece of artwork, but I want to also make it accessible and inclusive. And I think that was one of the pivotal moments. And this was even before, like when we had a P5.js is one of the software projects. It was created by Lauren McCarthy. And I think the fact that in 2019 that we all met for a contributors conference. And the thing is, was really pivotal. Just also calling everyone, this kind of goes with what CeCi was talking about, is everyone is a contributor. You don't have to know software development in order to be a part of the processing community. That's not actually what it's about. And I think one of the things that happened during this 2019 contributors conference was this agreement that no features would actually be added to the software projects, well, specifically P5.js, unless it was accessible and inclusive. So unless it was serving, you know, community members, like and really like low screen blind users, and adding more to the sound libraries, et cetera. So that was a really pivotal moment for me to think about my own practice and praxis, and even kind of, again, riffing off of what CeCi was talking about, that, you know, at the heart of everything that we do, it is a praxis. And you know, I think people have been talking about accessibility even before the pandemic, but all of a sudden it's made convenient. And why is that? And for me, that was a tension that I think made all of us think, okay, we just got to keep working. We got to keep doing this work. And I guess I just also kind of, to dote on the applicants, is almost like an overwhelming amount of them are focused on accessible features. Like, I want to work on this accessible feature, and I really appreciate that. And I think even one of the, I mean, just to kind of get back to the way that exhibiting looks, you know, different nowadays is with, you know, Casey's working on a feral file with bitmarks. And again, this is not my wheelhouse. I know more of the logistical things of like why, you know, ETH is important when we're converting, you know, dollars and donations and things like that, which I don't really want to talk about that. But these are the types of kind of projects that I feel are really impactful, because there is a focus on QT BIPOC artists that have been making digital work, and that have been making, you know, works within dance and movement practices that we're trying our best to kind of navigate and showcase that work at also to develop and build new ecosystems that are not, I mean, I also just want to, speaking of staying with the trouble or troubling, it's become very apparent that, you know, art is like one of the original colonial projects. So how do you decolonize those practices? And I think that's something that's very important. It's uncomfortable for some people, but I personally don't care. I do want to talk about that. And I think that, like, how do we get out of those systems to create something new? And I feel like the pandemic kind of pushed us to think about those things. So, but those were the kind of, to share a couple pivotal moments, those were a couple pivotal moments for me in the more recent past.
So maybe what we can do, since we're kind of starting to pivot and talk about kind of desired futures, and you know, one of the things that I think keeps coming up for all of us and a lot of artists I know, and certainly for me, the two new classes that I've kind of developed at San Jose State have been the grad class focused on alternative exhibitions, and then an undergraduate class where we're kind of like tracking, it's called Medium and the Message. And the way that it's a standard class here, but the way that I kind of ran it was we tracked, you know, like material history and then kind of looking at media history, but then also spent the last project looking at like the history of basic capital, and the way that has kind of shaped through kind of like the colonial expansion, shaped very much what the situation that we're in right now, and the idea that capital can be extracted out of a system in mass and then stay kind of cycling up here in this system of hyper accumulation, right? And that art is a large, it's like, you know, like the kind of like big part of the art market is this kind of like cycling, right? And there are very different art worlds, right? So there is this, but we're all in some kind of relationship to this big thing, right? Like we either reject it, or maybe we're willing to sacrifice here so we can give back here. You know, it's a constant navigation. And so maybe we can imagine a world where capital isn't the concern, right? That's not the limiting factor for us. If capital wasn't a limiting factor for us, and we'll get back because I want to press into that space too, but like before we go there, like let's kind of pie in the sky. If capital wasn't a constraint, what kind of, how would you be producing work? How would you be supporting artists? Like what would you be doing? And do we need capital as a constraint to start thinking about these things, or can we remove it from the equation and start there? We're so used to being right, like it's like, you know, how do you live without, you know, like without air or something?
CeCi wants me to respond, which is really funny.
You're a resident Mark, you're a resident anarchist. I feel like we need to.
Well, I mean, art is the ultimate fetishized commodity right now. It's like the best thing at eliminating all all the labor that goes into it is immediately wiped away as soon as you have the art up. Specifically in capitalism, there are practices before capitalism, and there are practices that still do exist inside of capitalism that don't do this, that actually acknowledge the labor that goes into it, that really trace and track and credit and are produced either collectively or with a certain amount of ethical concern. I think we have to pay attention to those practices, to all the labor and all the work that goes unnoticed by capitalism, because everything that capitalism pushes towards the margins is going to be essential to its undoing. But also the ways in which art is just necessarily a renegotiation of value. So even if we are existing in some magical post-capitalistic world, we will still be constantly renegotiating value, which is a difficult, traumatic, constantly uncomfortable process. So we have to create a world in which that process is not so jarring or frightening or problematic, where we're able to have that critical conversation with each other it is about putting pressure on theories and ideas by putting them into practice, but in this kind of safe space of the art world where radical ideas and activism are actually fundamentally changed by the process of making them into these like kind of mini encapsulations themselves. So I guess the 5 years down the line, yes, I want more collective communal structures for working. And I also want us to think about how we truly value each other's labor, and what does that renegotiation of value look like, even in this world where, yes, capitalism is there, but there are hundreds of different kinds of communisms are existing alongside of us right now. We just have to pay attention to that and lift those narratives up more, because when we lift up abjection, all of our wages and working conditions improve. Marxism. Okay, I will.
And do you think, and this is a question for everyone too, when CECI is talking about, wanting to kind of use gas in the future as like a system for collaboration and for community building, like, are we talking about, art to art? Are we collaborating outside of art production? And when we talk about collaboration, is that on the board level? Is there a board, or is it actually in the kind of production?
I mean, not to like answer CECI's question, but I think that like what a lot of artists and creative people are discovering right now, and this is being recognized in kind of the like institutional awards kind of realm, is that like biodiversity equals survival. And the more diverse teams that are incorporating interdisciplinary practice are the ones that are producing the work that is, I think, the most interesting right now, the most recognized right now. I mean, forensic architecture won a Turner Prize just a couple of years ago, and they're a sociology research group. And so I think that says a lot about the kinds of things that people are valuing, and the kinds of labor that are, as Dina was saying, is starting to become valued as artistic practice or as visual outputs of some kind of more rigorous praxis. Just as like a kind of like quiet aside, just, what you were made me think about like alternative systems that existed before capitalism. And one example, and this is a colonial example that coming from anthropology, is the financial system of Micronesia, and particularly on the Isle of Yap, which is a tiny island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And the people there have traditionally traded, value has been kept in rocks and stones that are scattered around the island. But obviously rocks are really hard to move, and it's really difficult when you have small boats and islands that are really far apart to carry these really heavy rocks across the ocean. So when there's weddings or property is exchanged or anything like this, basically the owner of these giant boulders just changes, and the whole world just goes, okay, this is, you know, this is Wade's boulder now. And that's kind of how value is attributed and shared and distributed, and, you know, how ownership is really ephemeral and really fluid. And I've been thinking a lot, especially in the context of NFTs and non-fungible tokens, about this financial system with the boulders, and how the changing hands of digital assets is starting to look a lot like that. I mean, everyone in the community can go and look at the rock and touch the rock. Everyone who can look at an NFT artwork can go and look at the piece of art. They can download the piece of art, but there's like an arbitrary like name that's inscribed on that feels like on a stone tablet of, you know, who is the owner of this thing. And it just made me think about how we're just kind of going in circles in a lot of different ways, and how like it is a really important moment to look at past systems, past capital systems, current capital systems, and reassess. Because I think that like as you said, Rhonda, like there's a lot of feeling that is directed towards like being against something. And it was recently pointed out to me that like a life lived in like resistance of something or in opposition to something is a really like tense and agitated place to be in. And I think that like what things like gas and processing and CLOACA and the lab show is that like by leading by example and by setting a new system, there's possibility for genesis, I think, and generation of new kinds of systems out of what may be broken or not working.
You know, something that I think that the kind of micro Indonesia example is a beautiful one insofar as like what it highlights, right? Are these like practices of labor that kind of don't get valued by capitalism that Dina's kind of talking about, namely like stewardship and care and kind of collaborative consensus, right? Because those are all kind of built into this kind of like that it is now Wade's rock, collaborative consensus. Now it is your rock. It is your job to steward and to care for the rock as well, right? And the idea that value is important as an organizing feature for stewardship, right? Which necessarily thinks about the future. And one of the things that I think is so interesting about NFTs, and maybe blockchain more broadly, NFTs and their kind of like coupling with cryptocurrency into the future, I think is, you know, the least interesting part of them. But like blockchain more broadly speaking is like, what if we did have a more democratic like ledger that like accounted for labor and kind of sucked it out of that thing that was cycling up here, right? Like we write better rules and we can use digital systems to keep, I don't know, but this is also a question. It's kind of like Jaron Lanier's model where it's like, well, let's create a bunch of microtransactions. So like every like has a value, everything that we kind of, every communication online is like monitored and is ascribed a value, which is this kind of hyper-capitalist on the one hand, but it's also a way to kind of disrupt the accumulation. And I don't know, like, do we want the thing to break, or is it better if we kind of like softly steward into this like new model or new modality? And under that kind of umbrella of thinking, maybe we can think about that as an ecosystem, and that's something that we've kind of, you know, brought up a couple times today. And if we wanted a new ecosystem, and this could be, you know, it could consider capital, but it could be social, it could be, you know, lots of different types of definitions of ecosystem. It could include, you know, our kind of non-humanoid friends on this planet that we will need if we want a future. How would you want to show art if you could create your own ecosystem? And who is the audience? And what is the relationship between audience and venue or platform and artist? Your audio is a little like in and out.
Oh, maybe it's my connection or something. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. But anyway, I do think that as we move forward, it's important to think on how you connect the physical to the digital, right? And I think I tend to, because with the pandemic, I really tended to flow with the digital for the past year and like not being very hopeful about the physical. But I do, the more I, think about it, I don't think it's possible to divorce them. So how do you keep them together, especially a place in San Francisco that is super impoverished from, culture that it's other than, what Silicon Valley has deemed as culture. So those questions are really floating through my mind. I keep asking different people about it, but yeah, I'm interested to how the other people here think about this connection between the physical and the digital, and if they are interdependent or not.
Yeah, I just would love. I mean, I was thinking about that a lot today. The fact that these big five oligarchs of that basically are Silicon Valley and have reframed globally what our aesthetics are as a community, as a world, and it's absolutely insane that the value system and the aesthetics that they have been imposed by Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, all these are so deeply impoverished. And so they're incredibly impoverished. And it's fascinating to me. It's how to, like, for me, the question always is, how do we empower art that retains ambiguity, like deep ambiguity, while still addressing the ethics of power? And doing that carefully and well in Silicon Valley is really important. It's also like imperative for all of us to be able to do that digitally, to reframe our world. And contemporary art since Duchamp is just all about the present moment. It's all about like re-encapsulating how to make art exist in a place in space and time to collectively and together. And I feel like we're grappling at this, but we still haven't we're still addressing our personal relationship with it rather than just saying these oligarchs have taken aesthetics away from us. How do we take it back? And how do we also just, screw them over? So, I don't know.
DENA, I would love to, so something that I've been like loosely researching, I don't know a ton about, is DAOs and different kinds of social groups that are organizing using blockchain. The one that the community that comes to mind first is Friends with Benefits, which has their own currency. It's called a Friends with Benefits token. And you buy, and in order, basically the whole community exists as a Discord server. But in order to get access to the server, you had to purchase so many tokens in order to join the community. And the idea is that like if you invest in the community and you bring intelligence and friends and good conversation, that increases the value for everyone. The value of the token goes up. You make money after contributing money. And so I'm wondering like what a system like that, if that's something that seems more feasible and more like accountable, or is that just another way of creating like a hierarchy or a cliquey, invite only sort of situation?
I know that Dorothy pointed out in the chat, thank you for that, Dorothy, that we skipped over Charlie. I think that Wade, what you're bringing up is actually like a kind of a super critical like pivot. And I don't want to lose that. So let's pin that. And then Charlie, if you have anything to add, we can incorporate that in the discussion in that pivot as well.
Yeah, I guess I was just what CeCi brought up, and I just love that she pulled out the old card, and I think it's really profound in a lot of ways, because when whether it's Hunt Projects or CLOACA or San Francisco or the Bay Area, or being in an art community at large in general, I really do think a lot about ownership and little even tokens or things like that affect the way you interact with the space are really important. And that ownership, when you put that into like a community ownership, even if it's, you actually you're not part of like sustaining the space or something like that, but you do have ownership by showing up and being part of it. All the parts of it that CeCi pointed out are really like a kind of deepen with my own motto of how I want people to engage in spaces. And I think that when you do that, like when I go into places around the San Francisco or the Bay Area, like at all, I do feel ownership over it. When, that's why we got so upset when like stuff happens like at 500 cap and things like that, because we rely on that, and that is part of our community. And then you really do, you take it on for yourself. So I think the ownership part of a community ownership is important for people to feel, to actually engage with spaces. So I always want to find a way to do that physically. And then in terms of your other question, if capital wasn't a constraint or something like that, I think, also realizing that years ago, that's kind of that's the basic model of CLOACA. And sorry if this is redundant, if Marcella mentioned it, but the initial build out of the shed cost money, but other than that, we didn't take on a new lease. And so that provided us insane amount of freedom in terms of extended installations, extended shows, periods of time where it didn't have anything in it. We weren't choking on that monthly rent because we didn't have a lease on it. And so as simple as that is, that's still like, that's a minor shift within the larger system, and it's often hard to find that. But that's made all the difference for us to be able to do it. I mean, it's nothing new too, like, gas, having it on wheels, coming from a lot of San Francisco apartment galleries. It's something where we're like using the little spaces we have to the maximum ability that they can output. So, yeah.
And that's something that I've really enjoyed watching, and I'm cognizant of time. We're at like 3 minutes to close, so we're just starting our conversation, right? I'm happy to stay on if anybody wants to hang out and kind of continue the conversation. But I'm also inviting you all to leave at the designated 7 o'clock time as well. So with that said, Charlie, I think one of the things that I've really loved seeing while the brick and mortars were shut down were like the exhibition along like the LA River, and like all of these kind of like works existing actually outdoors, and kind of so much of the work that I'm seeing now are dealing with these kind of like enmeshing of capital, of technology, of the biological, of the body, this kind of collapse into this one gooey thing, right? And to see it like installed in a white wall gallery is really impressive and lovely, and I love the gestures, but then to see it kind of coexisting like on a beach with like water lapping up against it, like it does something else, and it kind of speaks to communal, like it feels ritual, or it's it's something else. And like it's so much about the conversation today, and like CeCi's bringing up the card, or the like what happened before capitalism is maybe a very human thing, is to like look to the past in order to reorient for like alternatives for like the future, right? But I also think like art as kind of like a ritual object, or this kind of like thing that could bring us like steward us to this almost like shamanistic like experience to this other place, right? Like I'm seeing art do that, and not as like an asset necessarily, right? Like, so like what are the, and maybe it will always be, adjacent to asset, but I think, in CeCi's cards and kind of giving breath, like this kind of like gift back to the community, and asking like the art object to do something else, to be a site for some other possibility. And it's maybe too much to ask, but it's also like, it seems very much in line with kind of a historical trajectory.
And it's the art object, but also the art space. And I think that, Charlie, you brought up a good thing, that's sort of something that connects, well, in some ways all of us. But when I talk about gas, I want I don't want, I want people to look at what I'm doing and then start something themselves and realize, hey, I can make like a, you know, an item of clothing that I can put art in. And then that's my gallery. And that's actually just as interesting and just as relevant as, you know, MoCA. And like, and looking into the future, what I want to see is like thousands of grassroots artist run spaces, you know, doing projects in their backyard or doing projects in the trunk of their car or doing, and like, and I learned that from the Bay Area, you know, and it's, you know, you know, I've gone to shows at Toxic Tire Beach, you know, like you don't need to have like official channels. And I think the more people realize that and the more that they can create these other platforms for each other, the more there'll be. And maybe that goes back to what DENA was talking about too, which is sort of like how do we create other structures and then maybe also what Wade was talking about as well is like how do we create other structures that are organic in and of themselves and aren't just like, you know, sort of a reactive thing, but like something that is like a seed that's planted and becomes something quite beautiful, and then also and instrumental in terms of thinking about like what can an art object be, and then what kind of relationships can come out of that.
What is really important though, and I know there are a lot of students watching this, is that, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, is that we really need to embrace a shift of values. If we don't, none of these things are going to happen. Anything, you know, the way art, it will always exist, the system that we are familiar with, but what can push things forward, and to address what Dorothy mentioned before, to like come out of this model that we've lived with for centuries. There's so much space once you like quiet that to bring a new model through. But you really have to be willing to like leave behind a very ingrained system of values. And that's a big undertaking. But I think as you go forth, you know, being an artist, and if you stay in the community, I think that's really vital to think about and keep it in mind.
So I think what you're bringing up, the shift in value, right? These are all rules that we've just made up, and we've collectively said, okay, this is like, these are the rules, right? And so it's something that we're talking about in a lot of my classes, where like the shift, like politics, right, flows downstream from culture, right? And the shifts that we want to see in the world, we have to model, like, and to kind of understand it, to believe it, to kind of like believe it is possible, you have to see it, right? And the arts are in a really unique position if they can kind of pull themselves out of this like siloed, intractable conversation and engage in things, you know, Wade bringing up, you know, forensic architecture, you know, like the arts practices can kind of be used in judicial systems. The art practices can be used in things that don't necessarily produce art object. I love the art object. I think that will always be a part of the way that I think and orient myself in the world. But I think the artistic practice can look like a lot of things, right? And as we kind of co-create the world that we have to create in order for us to all continue living in it, like that practice can be a part of it. How is everyone doing? I have one more question that I'd like, but I also want to recognize that I've already extracted 4 more minutes of labor from you all than I had contracted with you. So, okay, that's great. Let me get Wade back up here. So if we are thinking about new practices, like what are the tools that we use? Like maybe, you know, like are there tools that we can use now, or what are the tools that we need to make in like 5 years to kind of like create these new frameworks for participants, or for patronage, for viewership, for production?
I want to say, like, I'll say one thing really quickly. And I think that like I said earlier, like I'm a really big proponent of like meeting people where they're at. And this also connects to your question of what I would do if capital was not an issue. And I've been really inspired by work that I've been seeing in places like Fortnite, which is a massively multiplayer online game that millions and millions of people play. There's a $17 billion digital asset economy that's attached to this game environment. And it's a fabulous place for showing art. There's a creative mode and you can make your own level, world, whatever you want to call it. An artist that I worked with, La Turbo Avedon, did this and created an installation in Fortnite last summer, and it was amazing, and it was visited by millions of people. And I have never had a show that I've curated been visited by, like, you know, maybe even 100,000 people. And so I think that there's something to be said, and there's something really exciting about going and looking towards these like semi-public spaces that are fully populated with people, and seeing how we can tease out more exciting experiences and by bringing art into those places.
I mean, I guess I could go. I mean, also just to kind of, again, riff off of what Wade is bringing up. I mean, we also have to acknowledge kind of the historical, like the genealogy of where all of this is coming from too. I love reminding people like, yo, net art has been around for decades. Remember that, you know, like this is not new. And, you know, within people, you know, with artists taking over different types of spaces, whether it be, you know, Michel Cardenas and Second Life, you know, back in, you know, 2008, and doing these really kind of radical things with the technology is another way that we can kind of collectively, individually and collectively push this evolution. I think Robin shared a thought in the chat about that, and that was something I wanted to kind of respond to. And then there's another thing. Oh, okay. I think it's because it's talking about accessibility, so my eye went directly there. I hope y'all don't mind if I read it. Benjamin asks, how can some of the accessibility improvements in the art world during COVID remain in place post-COVID era? Will Zoom as option remain in 1 year for live events or conferences? Will Jaffa still be streamed? How does this modify the existing arrangement with SF Bay Area and the global? I mean, I'd like to think that they would remain in place because this is something that is, you know, much needed by many different community members. But again, as I mentioned, the fact that even within, you know, the P5.js project, to have the creators even make that commitment that we're not adding new features unless they're accessible and inclusive, that's a way to actually model that change that we want to see. And I feel that, you know, that's just one example, you know, obviously, but, you know, I think that there are many things that I've seen different organizations do. I mean, even the folks here, I mean, DENA, CECI, Marcella, Charlie, Wade, like y'all have actually been doing that work. You know what I mean? I mean, even when I think about the lab as in, you know, as just a cultural institution within the Bay Area, that is one of the places I have always thought about that has always been ahead of the curve, to be honest. And I think that I want to see something, you know, or anything really that's much more multisensorial, and that again kind of goes back to accessibility and inclusion. You know, that is a commitment through the Processing Foundation, but I hope it just ripples out, you know, and also kind of, yeah, I just kind of feel that that's what I wanted to riff off of regarding to what Wade was bringing up, that we've seen a lot of this even within, this will be the last thing I say, within even tactical media practices. There's such a history that I hope that, again, students might be listening to, you know, to really explore and to be okay with failing. And at the same time, to really kind of make room for fun and for rest, because I think that's something all of us have been really, we've been kind of pushed to the limit, ironically, having, you know, transitioned into almost solely digital. So, yeah.
Thank you, Dorothy, for that. I think it's so important and easy to forget, right, that while we all want to engage and kind of create the world that we want to see and push back, that like part of the labors that aren't valued in our current system are those like labors of rest, of care, of like, you know, being soft and listening, and all of the things that, like, all of the traits that are kind of undervalued, and that kind of acknowledgement that we need to be a little bit more generous and softer with one another, right? Like when I'm confronted with a new idea, is my reaction to shut shut it down and be like, that's not how it works. Even, like Wade, talking about Fortnite and, this kind of like currency that I'm like, that's awful, that we shouldn't be, creating like, false worlds. We need to engage in this one. But it's kind of the question that Marcella is bringing up too, is like, what is the friction between this kind of, like digital self and this kind of speculative self, and what is the relationship to the kind of material world, and the kind of like, there's a continuum there, right? And what is it about my kind of like training that's coming from that kind of like history of kind of colonialism? What is it in me that's saying that Fortnite and hyperaccumulation of cryptocurrency is a bad thing? Is it? I don't know. Like, what is it? What's my knee-jerk reaction to things? And can I be soft and sit with it before I have an opinion, right?
I think as long as it breaks the algorithm, it's all good. Break the algorithm. As long as we're not
I think we need to go back to rocks.
Yeah, I like the rocks idea. Robin, you were asking, of course, artists have been working in these ways, shaping themselves for our discussion today for half a century. So I wonder why, where, how, now. I think continuing to imagine, continuing to evolve, and what pushes that evolution, right? Is it an evolution that's happening voluntarily because we see it as the right move, or are we in a constant state of kind of like inflammation and reaction, right? Is that the thing that's kind of pushing the evolution? Robin, did you want to say anything before? You're muted. You're muted, love. Robin, you're muted.
Sometimes that's a good thing. No, I'm really so appreciative of all that are participating today and your continuing efforts. So by my question, I didn't mean it as a demonstrative statement, but more a continuing curiosity, as life shapes us in this acceleration. It seems like we're in now, right? For everything that's surrounding us around climate change, which probably is the broad-based pyramid for everything else, including the pandemic. It just makes me think about that, and makes me proud of all of you who are continuing to imagine, how to participate and revolt and imagine and change.
Thank you, Robin. Yeah. And maybe on that last word of thanks, I will extend that thanks as well to everyone here. Thank you so much for your labor, your brain capacity, being willing to engage in this brief but speculative discourse around what worlds we want to be kind of rebuilding as we come out of our socially distanced endeavors here. Thank you all.
Thanks, Rhonda, and everybody.
Thank you.
Robin.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rhonda. Thanks, everyone. I hope to see you in real life.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Wade.